Social stratification occurs in other countries and not just the United States. For example, Great Britain is a very class-conscious society. The different classes have very different languages and educational backgrounds. Accent will often identify a person's class. Educational differences are stark between the public schools and the private schools that the wealthy can afford. Eton is the most exclusive of the private boarding schools, and it boasts that it has produced 18 of Great Britain's prime ministers. On the other hand, the Soviet Union, which revolted against the elites in 1917, tried to create a classless society. While guffawing at the stratification in the United States, the Soviet Union was creating and perpetuating their own class distinctions. The main basis for stratification was whether someone became a member of a Communist Party, and it was the party members that selected who would be invited to join, who would get the most desirable jobs, who would get the better housing, and whose children were allowed to go to the better schools was all decided by the Communist Party. And the Communist Party was stratified as well. Once the Communist Party was dismantled and state holdings were sold off to private individuals, then the idea of making a profit turned from a crime into a respectable goal. However, as the change from communism to capitalism took place, powerful mafia groups emerged to control the profits. We've covered a great deal now about theory, and I want to shift our attention at this point and talk a little bit about global stratification. To do this, we'll look more at data and compare geographical regions and talk in terms of industrializing and how that affects the resources of people that live there. Countries are categorized in different ways, but for the most part, countries are categorized by their level of development. The words first, second, and third world was used until fairly recently, but now the terms most and least industrialized and industrializing captures the three different levels of development. The more industrialized nations have the most amount of wealth, power, and prestige that are associated with them. The map on this slide helps you see the measure of gross domestic product, which is also a measure of how a country is doing. It's interesting to note that the majority of the population and the majority of the land on this planet is located in the least industrialized nations. So while land is often associated with wealth, it doesn't mean that all land conveys wealth on the inhabitants. Land has to have value, which will depend on the resources that come with the land. And there must be an appropriate level of technology to support extracting the resources. Note that only about a third of the world's inhabitants live in either most industrialized or industrializing nations. This map helps you understand income inequality in the Western Hemisphere. Think about the income difference of someone from Jamaica, a less industrialized country, as compared to someone in an industrializing nation like Mexico, which is about double that as compared to someone in the United States. Compare the Eastern Hemisphere, that of an oil-rich nation that is developed like Qatar, versus a country that is regionally close by, like Somalia. The differences in income goes beyond striking. Understand also that our Western notion of childhood, where children go to school, get immunizations for diseases, have beds to sleep in, and a belly full of food, let alone play sports and watch TV and play video games, that is not the reality of 2/3 of the children that live in less industrialized nations. The conditions of life in the slums can be brutal. Poverty is so deep and problematic that people go through garbage bins to try to find enough food to stay alive. Thinking critically, Open Season, Children as Prey, illustrates how brutal life can be for children in those ghettos. Some theorists have suggested that there be an alternative model, and that we add a category of oil-rich, non-industrialized nations. That is because those countries that are not industrialized but are immensely wealthy fall into a completely different category. Thus, to call them less industrialized mischaracterizes them. An example is Kuwait, which, though tiny by comparison to other oil-rich countries, has high economic resources per capita, and the residents of the country don't have to work for a living because the government can pay them an annual salary.